Well, good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled AI and Emerging Technologies in Clinical Trials, Practical Applications and Regulatory Considerations. My name is Ryan Muse and I'll be your X Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and your comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using the same chat panel. I'd also like to welcome our attendees viewing this presentation from our LinkedIn Live event, and I encourage you to submit your questions as well via the comments tab. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming to those who have registered on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Elucent, who developed the content for this presentation. Elucent is purpose-built to address the distinct needs of small and mid-sized biopharma companies. As a global full-service partner, Elucent provides drug development solutions spanning preclinical development through marketing approval and beyond. With cross-functional expertise and integrated delivery across regulatory strategy, early development, and clinical execution, Elucent helps biopharma companies navigate complexity and advance innovative therapies with confidence. Now, I would like to introduce our speakers for today's event. With over 20 years of leadership experience in life sciences technology, Nate Thompson brings a deep expertise in optimizing digital operations and enabling data-driven decision-making across the drug development lifecycle. Nate has a distinguished track record of leading enterprise-wide transformations with core strengths in AI integration, real-time data platforms, scalable enterprise architecture, and M&A technology alignment. As a former director and senior policy advisor at the FDA and a seasoned leader within the CRO industry, Sugata D has cultivated experience in a plethora of regulatory strategy disciplines, including clinical strategy, protocol development, dossiers for INDs and marketing authorizations, and expedited pathways. Over his career, Sugata D has developed specialized expertise in drug-device combination products and oncology therapeutics. Dr. Martin Johnson has over 20 years of experience in pharmacokinetics and pharmacometrics, gained through roles at Merck, Sharp and Dohme, AstraZeneca, and Orchid Research Labs. His career has focused on applying quantitative methods to support drug development. As Executive Director of Pharmacometrics at Elucent, Dr. Johnson develops and implements pharmacometric models to inform critical decisions across various stages of drug development. Christine Koza has more than 23 years professional experience in clinical research. As Executive Director and Global Head of Study Startup and Site Intelligence at Elucent, she ensures planning, preparation, and execution of study startup activities from site identification to site activation. Christine combines scientific rigor, strategic leadership, and operational expertise to enhance clinical trial efficiency and outcomes. But now, without further ado, I'd like to hand the mic over to our first speaker, Nate Thompson. You may begin when you're ready.
Thanks, Ryan. Let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm excited for the Q&A session at the end here. So I think the first thing that we should take a look at is just the change in the landscape that we're all dealing with. There is definitely a rise in the complexity of protocols, endpoints, and patient populations that we're serving. Protocol complexity in clinical trials has really become a significant challenge. I saw something where phase 3 protocols are now collecting on average about 6 million data points, and that figure's climbing by about 10% annually. Now, there's some very good reasons for that. Legitimate scientific drivers, such as advanced disease characterization, sophisticated biomarkers for purposes of medicine. Those are very important, obviously. A recent study that Transcelerate and Tufts did found that approximately a third of data points in protocols are non-essential to the primary or secondary endpoints. And this, again, causes a lot of complexity for investigative sites who are, facing, operational strain and longer startup times, but also from a data quality perspective, if we think about that. we're collecting a lot of data that's not being used for primary or secondary endpoints. And our attention is being diluted across these millions of data points, and so data quality can be affected as well. Lastly, I would say that participation can also be impacted because of these excessive demands for enrollment, and this can sometimes lead to inadvertently excluding underrepresented patient populations. Secondly, increased competition for participants, sites, and investigator attention. There is increased competition for patient sites and investigator attention in clinical trials, and this rises from a surge in clinical trial volume and shifting participant pools. Investigators and sites, they need to compete for top talent like we all do, and this can lead to recruitment delays, ultimately slower enrollment rates, and overall just strained clinical workflows. So to counter this, I think that strategies like enhanced referral networks are very positive. Having site champions for collaboration and looking at adaptive recruitment monitoring is pretty essential to make sure that we're securing participation and maintaining trial timelines. The third point here is the pressure to accelerate timelines and maintain data quality. We all want to go faster, and we all want to have amazing data quality. A lot of this pressure stems from market competition, regulatory streamlining, and most importantly, patient needs. Now, sponsors often are faced with this perceived trade-off. Do I want speed? Do I want quality? Well, you need both. Approaches like quality by design and risk-based quality management can be embedded into protocols and monitoring plans to, prevent costly amendments and regulatory delays and data inconsistency. So we need to be thinking about that. The fourth point here is not something new, but it is something that is ever growing, and that's the globalization of trials. We've been doing this for many, many years, but it does introduce some variability in execution and oversight. I think that this is largely due to the different regulatory requirements in various countries, where approvals in some countries can take months amid different documentation requirements and local authority standards. I think ultimately many of us would agree that getting to a truly set of global regulatory standards will greatly improve this. And then last but not least on this slide, the need for more adaptive technology-enabled approaches. Traditional clinical trials are often inefficient and have very rigid designs that can't accommodate real-time data insights, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about here as it relates to technology and AI. Adaptive trial designs, on the other hand, address this issue by allowing us to pre-plan for modifications like dose adjustments or early termination rates while we're accumulating that interim data so we can make decisions faster. Technology-enabled platforms can help by providing decentralized data capture and automating analytics and analysis during the conduct of the trial, which reduces delays and, most importantly, the burden on our participants. So Ryan, if we could go to the next slide, please. So emerging tech in AI in clinical trials. I know we all hear about AI every day. It's so amazing to see how fast this has come onto the scene and the value that it's providing. Clinical development is evolving beyond the traditional trial models, and AI is a big part of that. It's becoming a more practical use case in trial planning and execution, modeling, and more importantly, model-informed drug development, which my colleague Martin will talk about. And decentralized strategies are reshaping how trials are designed and run. Now, we have to keep in mind, depending on the therapeutic area and the indication, decentralized trials, fully decentralized trials will not be possible for everything, but it's forcing us to really think about what the trial needs from a design perspective to meet that participant need. We are using real world and patient generated data to help make more informed decisions earlier. And the overall goal here, obviously, is efficiency, scalability, flexibility, quality overall. Next slide, please. So what do we see AI really enabling if we take a step back? It's earlier and more confident development decisions, improve participant recruitment and enrollment efficiency, proactively identifying and mitigating risks, better utilizing complex and diverse data sets. AI is really great at being able to interpret very, very diverse data sets, and ultimately, more streamlined and efficient trial execution. Next slide, please. So as we look at the clinical trial life cycle, I'll talk a little bit about some of the areas where we see AI being used or being contemplated right now. Protocol design. I'm sure many of us have looked at this or seen things on LinkedIn or other mediums, but protocol design can really be benefited by AI as we look at feasibility modeling, those endpoint selections, and trial simulations as we get into digital twins and whatnot. From a patient identification perspective, those very, very large and diverse data sets, AI is really helping to scour those data sets, which means that we're picking better sites and that the recruitment is much more targeted. From a trial operations perspective, the monitoring that we do of the clinical trials can be more efficient and more automated by collecting diverse sets of information, better preparing our staff to go out and perform those monitoring tasks. We can better look at site performance and optimize that, as well as just generally better predicting and mitigating risks. From a data management perspective, AI is really helping in the automation of cleaning data, integrating data, and detecting those anomalies in near real time. And then finally, from an analysis and reporting perspective, predictive modeling gets us to faster insights, and that's better for decision making. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan for some poll questions.
Yes, thank you very much for beginning our presentation with some very interesting insights. But before we continue on, we'd like to hear a little bit from our audience right now. And appearing on your screen is a polling question, and you can participate by selecting on any of the answers, well, whichever answer is most applicable to you, and then clicking submit to register that answer. The question that we're asking is, are you using AI now? Your answer options are planning or exploring, but not yet implemented, beginning implementation in selected areas or pilot programs, fully implemented across multiple areas. Give you all a chance to consider an answer before we take a look at what the results are. Again, to the question of, are you using AI now? We see lots of answers coming in, and I appreciate you taking the time to do so. And looks like we've got almost most of our answers in. Give you just a few more seconds to think about it and participate. All right, looks like we've got our answers in. Let's take a look at the results here. We have 61% of you choosing for planning or exploring, but not yet implemented. And then 24% of you choosing for beginning implementation in selected areas or pilot programs, and then 16% coming in for fully implemented across multiple areas. So thank you for participating in that. Let's take a look, though, at another poll. As a follow-up to this question, we'd like to know just how are you using it? This question, this answer options this time are for internal efficiencies, early development or asset identification, clinical study planning, clinical trial operations, or regulatory, for example, protocols, medical writing, or regulatory intelligence. As with the previous question, take a moment to select one of the answers you see in front of you and then click submit to register your answer. In a little bit, we'll hand it back to our speakers, but for now, we just want to hear from you again, just about how you're using AI. Looks like it's something that's on everyone's mind right now as far as the results from the first question were. Looks like we're getting lots of answers in from you all. Thank you very much. We'll leave it open just a little bit longer to try to get as many of your results in. All right, we've got the majority of answers in. Let's go ahead and take a look at the results here. We have 50% of you choosing for internal efficiencies, then 9% coming in for early development, 2% then for clinical study planning, 14% for clinical trial operations, and then 25% for regulatory. Thank you all very much for your participation. I'm going to hand it back to our speakers now.
I mean, I think these poll results really confirm what we're seeing across the industry. AI is really touching every stage of drug development, from asset identifications to clinical planning. to trial operations and regulatory strategy. I was a little bit surprised to see only the one response for clinical planning, but I'm sure hopefully this presentation will give you some ideas about how that could be done. Our goal today, again, is to give you a practical perspective on all of these areas from a CRO that's involved at every step, from early discovery through clinical trials all the way through marketing authorization.
Yeah, I really I found those results pretty interesting, and it does confirm, as Sugata mentioned, what we're seeing as well. I thought that the number of polling participants that were using it in medical writing, protocol development, regulatory, I think that's a great use case. and the reason that I call that one out is it's very easy to have a human in the loop for that use case. We can use AI to better write, and then we as humans, the human in the loop part, can review that output and make sure that we put our name and our accountability on that. I think that's a really great use case, and we see that a lot in the industry.
Great. Ryan, can you go to the next slide, please? So we've just heard about the forces reshaping how clinical trials are executed: more complex study designs, fiercer competition for patients, mounting pressure to compress timelines, and an industry that can no longer afford the traditional manual-heavy approach. So the question is, what does a smarter technology-enabled approach actually look like in practice? Let me walk you through how that's showing up at the protocol development stage, because this is where ultimately trials are won or lost even before a single patient is enrolled. Today, natural language processing tools are being applied to large libraries of historical protocols, both internal and public domain, to flag design risks before they even reach FDA. These tools can identify overly complex eligibility criteria, inconsistencies between endpoints and statistical plans, and places where prior amendments have occurred across similar programs. The result is a leaner first draft, fewer protocol deviations downstream, and critically less time lost to avoidable amendments. Equally important, these systems can benchmark a proposed design in real time against regulatory precedents and competitor studies. For a small biotech working in a first-in-class program, for example, that kind of intelligence used to require months of manual research, and now it's becoming increasingly available at the authoring stage. The second area is adaptive and innovative trial design. Nate touched on this a little bit earlier. Simulation engines now allow sponsors and CROs like Elucent to model complex adaptive scenarios, seamless phase 2-3 transitions, adaptive dose finding, response adaptive randomization, with statistical rigor that regulators expect. Bayesian frameworks in particular allow teams to pre-plan interim decision rules with well-controlled error rates, avoiding post hoc adjustments that can raise red flags in review. We're also seeing a meaningful uptake in decentralized elements, ePro, wearable sensors, telemedicine visits, not necessarily as standalone trials, but as hybrid components that reduce patient burden and improve patient retention, particularly in rare disease and pediatric programs where patient proximity to academic centers is a genuine barrier. The third area, and one that we're spending a lot of time on at Elucent, is real-world data and synthetic control arms. In oncology and rare disease specifically, the ability to construct a propensity match external control from EHR or claims data can significantly reduce the size of placebo arm, or in some cases eliminate it entirely. Regulators have shown genuine openness to this. FDA's Project Optimus and EMA's Adaptive Pathway initiatives have created legitimate entry points for these designs. The key is biomarker-driven enrichment, selecting the patients most likely to respond, reducing noise, and improving signal in populations that are often too small for traditional powering assumptions. Next slide, please. Now, even the most elegantly designed protocol fails if you can't enroll it. This is where AI is arguably delivering the most immediate return in feasibility and startup. Traditionally, site identification has relied on sponsor relationships, investigator reputation, and somewhat gut instinct. Machine learning changes that calculus. Today, models can rank sites by enrollment velocity, patient density, therapeutic expertise, and protocol-specific fit. They can cross-reference publication history, prior trial performance data, and EHR population signals to surface sites that traditional approaches would have missed entirely. At Elucent, we think about this as potentially identifying the hidden gem sites, investigators with the right patient population and operational capability who simply aren't in the standard Rolodex. And competitive indications that intelligence can prove to be invaluable. Network mapping also help sponsors avoid patient pool overlap, understanding when multiple studies are competing for the same patients at the same sites, which is increasingly common in oncology and rare disease and even early phase CNS work. On the startup side, AI is compressing timelines at nearly every step. AI-assisted document preparation, IRB, EC submissions, informed consent forms, site-specific regulatory packages. These can all reduce drafting time by 40 to 60%. Smart contract tools to streamline budget negotiations and site agreement execution, which has historically been one of the, I'll put it nicely, one of the most painful bottlenecks in startup. Automated regulatory submissions readiness help flag country-specific gaps before they become delays, and digital site activation dashboards give sponsors and CROs real-time visibility into where each site stands instead of the spreadsheet and email patchwork that still characterizes a lot of the programs that we see today. So what's the cumulative impact? We're seeing credible evidence of 30 to 50% reductions in feasibility timelines, 2 to 3 times more sites evaluated versus manual approaches, and the potential to meaningfully accelerate the first patient first visit. That's real information. And for a biotech burning cash on a monthly burn rate, that it does matter enormously. Next slide, please. Let me now shift to something that sits at the intersection of all of this, and frankly, where I see sponsors often stumble. Using AI in trial design is not just a technical decision, it's a regulatory decision. And the time to think about regulatory expectations is not after you built the model, it's before you've deployed it. So the first pillar here on the screen is data transparency. Every AI-generated recommendation that influences trial design decision needs to be traceable. Regulators, FDA, EMA, and others are increasingly asking, show us the audit trail. What data went into this model? What version was deployed? What did it recommend and why? This isn't just about having logs. It's about building your data governance framework upfront, defining provenance, access controls, version management in a way that can live in the trial master file and withstand inspection. AI-assisted monitoring tools similarly need to flag protocol deviations with documented confidence thresholds and clear human review checkpoints. The human oversight element is non-negotiable. The second pillar here is model justification, and this is where I'd encourage anyone in this audience to push back on potential vendors. If a tool is influencing your eligibility criteria, your adaptive decision rules, your endpoint selection, you need analytical validation for that specific use case, not just the algorithm's general class. For your population, your endpoint, your data, that's what it needs to be for. FDA's guidance on this is increasingly clear. Black box approaches for critical trial decisions are not acceptable. Explainability matters. Reviewers want to understand how models reach its output, particularly when it's informing enrichment or dose selection. Fitness for purpose evidence showing that a tool works in your context is becoming a baseline expectation. The third pillar, and perhaps the most strategic advice I can offer as a former regulator, is to engage the FDA early. Request a type B or C meeting to discuss novel trial design elements, AI-informed components, or synthetic control approaches before your IND submission. Don't just file and wait. The FDA has signaled genuine openness to these innovations, but they need to understand your approach on their term and not necessarily yours. FDA's iSTAND pilot program, Innovative Science and Technology Approaches for New Drugs, exists precisely to facilitate early review of emerging tools in drug development. I recommend that you use it and stay current on the draft guidance landscape. FDA's AI and machine learning framework is actively evolving, including guidance on predetermined change control plans, which govern how models can be updated post-approval. Next slide, please. My final slide brings us to the area that I think carries perhaps the most ethical and regulatory weight, patient selection and recruitment. AI has enormous potential here and significant risks if deployed carelessly. When AI is being used to stratify patients by biomarker profile or to apply a scoring algorithm that determines protocol eligibility, that logic must be pre-specified in the protocol. FDA expects analytical validation of companion diagnostics and AI scoring tools in this context, and enrichment strategies need to be documented and justified to ensure that they're not introducing unintended selection bias. That is a common gap. Sponsors will often develop AI-based screening tool during startup, deploy it operationally, and then realize it wasn't adequately described in the protocol or validated for the patient population in question. That creates problems at review, in some cases, data integrity concerns. The statutory requirement for enrollment diversity from 2022 has raised the bar significantly for enrollment diversity. Proactive strategies are now expected, not passive commitments. If you're using AI-driven recruitment tools, and many sponsors are, these must be audited for demographic bias in their training data. An algorithm trained predominantly on data from large academic medical centers in urban settings will systematically underperform in rural or minority communities. That's both a scientific problem and a regulatory one. Underrepresented populations often require targeted outreach strategies, not just algorithm optimization. The technology can help you identify these patients, but it needs to be designed with equity as an explicit objective. When AI-powered recruitment involves electronic health records or consumer data, you're in HIPAA and GDPR territory immediately. Digital consent platforms must meet FDA 21 CFR Part 11 requirements for electronic records and the signatures. And patients must understand in plain language in the informed consent form how AI is being used in their screening and trial matching process. That consent language is increasingly being scrutinized by IRBs and ethics committees and even FDA. Finally, for decentralized and hybrid recruitment, social media campaigns, patient registries, app-based screening, and all IRB approved materials, these must reflect the actual methodology. Remote screening algorithms need to be locked and documented before enrollment even opens. The eligibility confirmation process must adhere to protocol requirements regardless of which digital pathway brought the patient to the site. So on the right side of the slide, you'll see what I consider 6 regulatory watch points for every team as a stress test. Protocol lock of AI logic, pre-specification of biomarker analyses in the SAP, a documented algorithmic bias assessment, AI-specific informed consent language, and 21 CFR Part 11 compliance for all eClinical systems and parallel alignment between FDA and EMA strategies. That last one deserves some emphasis. Divergent requirements across agencies can often create costly work. If you're running a global program, it's important to build your regulatory strategy with both agencies in mind from day one. So to summarize the arc of these 4 slides, technology is enabling us to design smarter trials, identify the right sites faster, recruit the right patients more efficiently, but technology brings regulatory obligations around transparency, validation, early engagement, and equity that can't be treated as afterthoughts. At Allucent, we believe that CROs that differentiate themselves in the biotech space are the ones that bring both the technical capability and the regulatory fluency together. And ultimately, that's going to be the combination that gets drugs across the finish line. I'll stop there and hand it over to Christine, who will cover some of the practical applications of AI in patient identification, site selection, and trial execution.
Thank you, Sugato. So if we start with the next slide to discuss patient identification. We talked about the complexity of the protocol, but we're seeing also the site bandwidth being quite limited, and a lot reliance on manual review of medical records leads to eligible patient being missed. So how AI can address that? They're addressing this gap systematically and continuously identifying eligibility signals across large and complex data sets. AI will process structured data like lab reports, medication, and unstructured data like clinical notes or pathology reports against the complex and inclusion and exclusion criteria, which will help identify eligible patients. Scanning electronic medical records and real-world data helps identify both the obvious eligible patient, but also the hidden one. So as we keep AI keeps running throughout study startup and enrollment, it enables continuous evaluation of patients. When new lab reports emerges, new data, newly diagnosed patients, we can identify those patients, and existing patients becoming eligible can also be identified through that continuous reevaluation. So it improves, obviously, speed and accuracy as well as diversity, while keeping the investigators in the loop. So now that we've identified eligible patients, let's move to practical solutions in site selection. And by combining epidemiology data, electronic medical records, but also insurance claims and protocol-specific inclusion-exclusion logic, AI can now link those eligible patients to institution investigators and generate a geographic mapping of where those patients are. So AI will then AI models will also assess likelihood of site success. And to predict that site enrollment performance, AI analyzes a number of factors, past performance, including historical enrollment metrics or retention rate. It includes operational readiness, reviewing screen failure rates, data quality, among others, and the patient diversity, as well as the competitive trial landscape and competitive trials. So looking at all these elements, it helps identifying the right sites and targeting those sites. Now moving to actual site feasibility, AI can also not only generate that list of sites, but it will support an automate feasibility assessment. It can reuse past responses, pre-fill the questionnaires, and cross-check the responses against known factors, known performance metrics. AI can also help analyze the feasibility responses and flag inconsistencies to really help identify the hidden feasibility risk. So that support obviously is a selection of fewer and better performing sites, but also support just-in-time models. So we have our eligible patient, we know where to find them. Let's now review how we can recruit and support retention. So moving to the next slides, I would like to discuss a few technology-enabled personalized patient recruitment solution. And while the patient matching continues in the background, and based on the enrollment planning, which AI can also support, we can detect early signals of enrollment challenges, slowdown, declining engagement, screening inefficiency. It will flag the risk and trigger targeted interventions, which can be referrals. It can support digital outreach campaign where AI not only learn, but also adapt in real time to adjust the targeting channels and timing as the campaign runs. Online pre-screening is embedded into study website to assess the basic protocol alignment. It can dynamically adapt questions based on prior answers, helping patients understand early whether a study fits them before they reach the site. So that supports a targeted and really personalized approach. It can generate tailored recruitment messages based on patient demographics, disease profile, geography, language, and preferences. It uses plain language, which is more easily understood by the patient, to generate really those patient-friendly materials aligned with both disease and treatment burden, as well as cultural context and multilingual support. So if we move now to trial execution, let's review some decentralized approaches to expand access. Sugato was alluding to informed consent. There are now solutions to build this remote informed consent delivered through secure web portals, tablets and smartphone, but also we can provide video support and telehealth or telemedicine enrollment. Another important technology piece is the remote data capture. Again, through mobile apps, web platforms, patient-reported outcome, and clinical outcome assessment, as well as diaries, can be completed remotely by the patient, which enables expanding access to trials. But it can also schedule triggers and schedule reminders and generate notifications to improve compliance of completion of those outcomes. And an important step is also the direct integration with the study databases for real-time visibility. So it really does support this remote access and decentralized solution. And last one will be the remote care delivery and monitoring, which is really supporting, again, through smartphones, tablets, computers, wearables. You can support routine checkups and follow-ups, medication management, prescription refills, chronic disease management. So the patient does no longer need to be present on site. A lot of those technology solutions can support remote access and expand access to patient. And so beyond patient access, AI can also increasingly used to assess startup cycle times, resourcing decision, but also data quality signals. And talking about data, let's now look how AI is helping us make smarter decisions about the drug itself through the model-informed drug development. And I'm handing over to Martin.
Thanks, Christine. I would like to start with a small introduction in my next slide about model-informed drug development. MIDD is an approach that uses quantitative mathematical models built in from biological, pharmacological, and clinical data to inform optimized decisions across full drug development lifecycle, from early discovery through the regulatory submission and post-approval activities. The characteristic in MIDD is the word informed. MIDD is not purely descriptive. The goal is to simply characterize the existing data, but to use the model predictively to simulate future outcomes, anticipate risks, and support decisions before all the empirical evidence is available. MIDD sits at the intersection of pharmacology, mathematics, statistics, medicine, and increasingly data science. It integrates knowledge from multiple sources like in vitro experiments, animal studies, early clinical data, literature data into a coherent quantitative framework. There are numerous methodologies that we can bring under MIDD umbrella. The figure here presents all the methodologies which could come under that MIDD. The most well established and recognizable to those working in drug discovery or development are pharmacokinetic or PK and pharmacodynamics or PD. Evolution of these approaches include population PK, physiologically based PK, and exposure response modeling. More recently, these techniques have been applied to modeling disease progression, conducting meta-analysis of clinical trials, treatment and mechanisms often referred as MBMA, modeling and simulating many aspects of clinical trials referred as CTM and CTS in the slide. And it's also included MIDD framework or system biology models and their extension as a quantitative system pharmacology models or QSP. All these tools which comes under MIDD, which can be used either individually or in combination, and these techniques can help clinical development programs accelerate making a quantitative decisions. Let's go to the next slide, please. So what is really in the description of clinical development? That includes a lot of key stages where we make decisions. For example, dosing and dose and regimen selection. This is the most common use of MIDD. where the dose has been predicted even from your preclinical stage. You predict the MIDDs are used to predict what would be the doses in the first in human. So on it goes until the final regimens. MIDD integrates information across different sources and predict the dose, and that's becoming one of the main application of MIDD. And comes to preclinical and clinical translation, where we integrate information across the different sources like in vitro systems, animals, to predict what would happen in the human. And we all know that the physiology of animal and the disease in animal is different than how it is in human. That's where these models comes in, which integrates information from animals and understand the physiology and then translate that into human. In that way, MIDD helps picking the dose, utilizing the data from early to the late, and also in terms of simulating different trials, learn from the early trials, and predict how the future trials or phase 3 trials would look like, to optimize the dose, to optimize the design and study duration and the sampling schedules. And in this way, it keeps going. The MIDD has been used in different stages in the drug development. But the most important thing happens in model-informed drug development is the regulatory standing of MIDD has grown substantially. Both FDA and EMA now formally embed modeling and simulation in their frameworks in key areas like dose justification, extrapolation from adult to pediatric, looking at assessment of drug-drug interaction. So these things doesn't become optional. Using of MIDD becomes an expectation. So this kind of gives you the model-informed drug development phase. In the next slide, we will move into AR. So you have seen the model integrated drug development has always been a data-driven approach in a quantitative framework. What is changing nowadays is the nature of that data. We are getting electronic health records, wearables, digital biomarkers, real-world evidence data, which generating a richer and more continuous information than what we had 10 years back. So we now need to expand our MIDD toolkits into artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques. I think that's what we are moving towards. So we see this as a natural progression in our data-driven drug development, where we are moving from MIDD and extending ourselves into AI. So there are a few examples that's worth explaining. So one is covariate identifications. Our current approaches are good and they are very much data-driven as well, but they lack to identify some non-linear relationships. So the machine learning methods like random forests and gradient boosting, they screen the covariates faster and they are better at detecting non-linear relationships, and they are much quicker than the traditional way of doing. So in this case, what happens, machine learning is trying to help accelerating the way we do our modeling. So in this case, the machine learning inform the pharmacometrician, but they don't replace them, because the machine learning goes into the framework of what we already developed in MIDD. Similarly, for biomarker discovery, we have now a richer sense of data. So the current MIDD approaches may not be able to handle the depth and the massiveness of the data, but AI methods can integrate them and make them identify the best predictive model, predictive biomarker that can go into the normal or MIDD methods like exposure response. So even in this case, it feeds into the current approaches and extend it rather than replaces it. Similarly, for NLP and evidence synthesis, it makes it so faster to collect the data from literatures and also from clinical notes much more efficiently than the manual review. So this is a significant practical benefit for model-based meta-analysis and QSP model building. Fourth is a hybrid and neural ODE models, and here we have this more complexity of the data, the complex dynamics in the data that can be captured using the newer techniques like neural ODEs, and then combined with the MIDD methods where we have the mechanistic understanding to make more reasonable and interpretable results. So it is all going towards AI enters this place and extends what MIDD can do now, and AI is taking it much forward. So what also happens in this phase is the MIDD and the modeling and simulation. This can happen, developed a good rigor with the regulatory authorities over the several decades, over last 2 decades. So this modeling and simulation now becomes a reference point for how AI models can be evaluated. For example, in terms of data quality, we have the similar rigor in our pharmacometric models as well, where the poor sampling design or a missing covariate can lead into a model uncertainty and so on a misprediction. Similarly, that applies to AI as well, because the training data set in AI, it defines the boundaries of what the model can learn. So data sets becomes a key, and the quality of the data set becomes even more important with AI, and also with the heterogeneous density of the demographics. If the AI data set contains only certain demographics, the predictions about the other demographics become infeasible or less predictable, and that also increases bias. So the data quality rigor checks what we do for pharmacometrics. It's also applicable to AI. Even more, it is applicable to AI. When it comes to assumptions, pharmacometrics models or MIDD approaches has its own assumptions. Likewise, AI models has the assumptions as well. So there is a clear evaluation framework for how these things are tested in pharmacometrics. Similarly, that can be applied in AI. For example, in AI approaches, the architectural choices and the training data or regularization choices that makes the assumptions, that consists the assumption of the model. It should be really expected when we go into the regulatory evaluation framework. Those things are completely documented. Similarly, for the validation in pharmacometrics approaches, we have external validation, which tests the current model in a different data. Likewise, the similar approach is also applicable for AI, where we have the test and train and test data, where we evaluate our model in the test data. If it is not performing well in the test data, our model is not really fit for purpose anymore. Then comes the transparency, where AI is having the challenges. In a modeling and simulation approach, we have the complete trial of how the model started from the source of the data to the until we complete the model. In a black box predictions kind of model, it cannot be defended when the reviewer asks how the model arrived at a dosing recommendation. So regulators are very clear about on this ambiguity. So it has to be unambiguously said. The model has to be clearly derived from data to the outcome. So AI is most powerful now, but it has to be embedded in the same rigorous structured workflow that made the modeling and simulation or MIDD credible. So MIDD, the credibility is now kind of making a way for AI to go to the same kind of structures. So it will be acceptable, and it will can move into the productively used in drug development. If you could move to the next slide, please. So we have slightly covered where AI fits in MIDD and what are the regulatory expectations. we compare that with how it is done in pharmacometrics or MIDD. Now the question is, what does a responsible adoption actually require in practice? We can put this into 5 elements, and we also have to be carefully frame that responsible AI adoption is not it's a technology project. It is more of an operating model change. It involves people, processes, governance, platforms, and scientific standards. Organizations that treat it as a software procurement exercise tend to struggle when they try to tend to defend their AI workflows. So it involves more than just an implementation or installation of a software. First, let's look at governance. Governance is where you need clarity on where AI can and cannot be used, who's accountable when it is. The principle of human in the loop review is central. AI can process information at scale and identify patterns human might miss, but for scientific and regulatory facing outputs, the judgment must remain with a qualified person. AI informs, but human decide. That's the accountability structure need to be defined and documented and maintained. And then the context of use. Pharmacometricians will recognize this framing much quicker. It is the same concept used for model credibility assessment in MIDD. Specify clearly whether an AI system is being used for productivity, quality control, or regulatory evidence generation, and match the validation rigor to the risk level. For example, an AI tool drafting an internal summary table is not as category as one of those output directly informs the dose recommendation in a submission. So depends on where it is being used. The context of use should be used to have the rigor to check them and put them into the evaluation framework. Then the traceability. Capture prompts, inputs, outputs, and review decisions. Maintain version control of datasets, scripts, AI-generated content. In a regulatory environment, if you cannot really reconstruct what the system was given, what is produced, and what the scientist did with that output, you don't have a defensible audit trail. This is particularly important for large language LLM model applications where prompts can vary across user systems. And technology and data control. Use secure private environments for confidential data, clinical data set, proprietary model structures, unpublished clinical trials might not be routed through the public AI systems. The monitored AI performs over time, unlike traditional modeling and simulation tools, where we get a model, it doesn't change. It always be the same, but in AI model behavior can shift between platforms. And when the input changes, that could be big changes in the output. So all those things has to be controlled as we adapt AI. And the last one, which is also more important one, is we need pharmacometricians or MIDD or people who work in this clinical pharmacologists who understand AI methods well enough. So that is a big shift in the training that will be required. So the technology is ready. Harder work is building the operating model around it with clear ownership, a defined validation expectation, and human review at every critical step. With this, I will hand it over to Nate for the closing remarks.
Thanks, Martin. We'll get to some questions here in just a moment, but next slide, let's just kind of wrap up the conversation if we can. I think you've heard from my colleagues today that, we see that we're evolving beyond the traditional clinical trial model. We've got to consider innovative models backed by AI, MIDD, and decentralized strategies for better, more flexible, smarter execution. Data-driven insights is something that AI is really driving. Being able to better leverage real world and patient-generated data allows for quicker and better informed decisions. And at the end of this, what we're all here to achieve is, technology-enabled processes that are driving greater efficiency. So with that, I know that we're close on time. Ryan, I'll hand it over to you maybe for some questions.
Yes, well, thank you very much for this very insightful presentation today. I'd like to invite our audience at this point to keep sending their questions or comments right now for this Q&A portion of the webinar. Also, I want to direct your attention towards the handouts module, where you'll find some additional documentation related to today's presentation to download for some further reading. For our questions, if you're attending via GoToWebinar, please use the questions window. And for those watching on LinkedIn Live events, feel free to post your questions in the comments section. Now, I've already received a whole bunch of questions from the audience, so we're going to get started with what I've got here. And this first question, and maybe Sagato, this might be something you can speak to. It's asking if you could just please elaborate how propensity-matched external controls reduce placebo arm size where appropriate.
This is a great question. So propensity matching for the full audience uses real-world patient data, EHR records, registries, prior trials, etc., as a substitute for some, but possibly not all of your placebo arm. The idea is that you match external patients to your trial populations on key baseline characteristics. You create a statistically comparable comparator, and that allows you to either shrink your randomization ratio or in some unique cases, eliminate the placebo arm entirely. FDA has been most open to this in the rare disease arena, also in some oncology scenarios where placebo randomization is ethically or practically difficult. That said, this requires very high quality data and early regulatory alignment. It's a very rigorous methodology and not a shortcut. So lots of considerations there. Happy to elaborate further with the individual that asked this question.
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much for that answer. Next up here, someone's wondering, does Lucent use AI tools that have been built by Lucent, or are they using outside providers to provide access to AI tools for the key tasks you describe being done?
Yeah, I'll take that one. We have at Lucent built our own front-end AI capability. It's called Lucent AI. We're very proud of it. The reason that we took this avenue is because we wanted to make sure that we were not training any model. We don't share any information with the large language models. We connect to them and we leverage them, but we do not share any of our prompts, any of our responses, and we actually redact any PII before it ever even gets sent to the model for interaction. So security was our primary driver there, and the flexibility to be able to connect our AI application to any of the large language models.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Now, as a follow-up for the discussion about your AI, someone asked if just sort of how can sponsors compare the AI capabilities of various CROs to aid their selection?
So that's a great question. With AI, if you are using what I'll call not a closed loop AI capability, if you're just using, as an example, just a free version of ChatGPT, anything that you put out is going into the model. Anything that is on the internet, the models are learning from. So to answer your question, the best way is to have a conversation. There's nothing better than having a conversation with your prospects and getting a better understanding from them how they're leveraging AI. Using AI to make that determination can be dangerous. Many people can put out on various platforms what they are doing when maybe in fact they're not quite that far along. So again, I would just come back to the good old conversation. You'll be better equipped to understand what people are doing and how they're doing it.
It's a very good tip. Thank you very much for that. Next up, and I think Christine, maybe you could speak a little bit to this. Someone's wondering if you could address US and EU privacy concerns in using AI in patient identification, particularly they're asking about limitations.
So all the data that AI is using is publicly available. Only EMR access will keep the patient confidentiality. That's a guarantee, and that's a need. And there are solutions that they're using to that. Pharmacy can prescribe a medication. That's how we know that they have such disease. So when we talk about patient identification, it's not a personal patient that we identify, but a potential patient. It's a dot on a map, and we go through then the site and the investigators to narrow down these access. So that's where the digital outreach then help. We know the patient exists, we just don't know who they are directly. But there's also some technology now offering patient voluntary access. So patient can actually volunteer to be contacted in case of a clinical trial interest, but they remain confidential to this technology solution that they've accepted.
Great, thank you. And I know we're running low on time, but still, I've got a question. I'd love for Martin to be able to answer someone's question here and participate as well. Someone's wondering, will AI fit into existing pharmacometrics workflows, or do you think it's going to disrupt them?
I think we have seen in one of my slides, it really fits into what we can do. The AI extends what MIDD can do. Given we are getting a plethora of data now and more information are thrown at us, and we need these additional tools which can help us to get the complexity out of it and get a good reliable markers for MIDD to go on further. So that completely fits in our workflow. But what is the key for pharmacometricians or people in MIDD is to adapt it more and use it to make your life easier and make a better contribution to the drug development industry rather than ignoring it. Adapting it and moving forward is the best way integrated with the pharmacometrics work.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that answer, and all of you for all of your answers, but we have reached the end of our time today. To our audience, know that if we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at Elucent will follow up with you, or if you have some further questions, you can direct them to the contact info that's up on the screen. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you click the exit button, and your participation is appreciated as it helps us to improve our webinars. Additionally, I've shared a link to view the recording of today's event in the chat box, which you can also share with your colleagues so they may register for the recording here as well. For those watching via LinkedIn Live events, we encourage you to visit xtalks.com so that you can register for this event and then gain access to features such as viewing the recording and more. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speakers for their wonderful time here today. We hope that you found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for coming.